Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. And Happy New Year, everyone, because we may be recording this in December, but it's not going to reach your ears until the first week of January 2025. Here's to everyone having a great and blessed New Year. And our guest today is Tara Wild, and we are separated by the entire continent of North America. I'm on the east side. She's on the west side. But, you know, it's interesting how paths cross. And our paths crossed a while ago, and we've finally gotten together and giving you this episode. So, hi, Tara. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Kathy. Thank you for having me. Super happy to be here.
Absolutely. It's our honor and our privilege. So before we get started, and I always have tons of questions and thoughts and comments and everything, but could you just start us out by sharing a little bit of your background, a little bit of your story with our listeners?
Absolutely. It's always hard to know exactly where to start with these big stories and these big shares. So I am a mother of two children. And up until 4 years ago, I lived in the city of Vancouver, which is on the west coast of Canada, with my husband, who was a filmmaker. His name was Darcy. And we were there raising our beautiful children together. He had a very, lucrative career as a film producer. And I guess it all sort of begins when the world shut down for the surprise of COVID. So we actually were feeling very confident and kind of had no fear around the virus itself necessarily. I am a teacher of holistic medicine to a certain extent. I use medicinal plants for healing, and I have always felt very solid in my body. So I didn't have a lot of fear around it. But when the world shut down, it gave Darcy and I 6 whole months spent together with our kids. And that was cool for us because, because as a filmmaker, you can imagine he works really long hours. Vancouver is known as Hollywood North. So really going on. Yeah. And so I did a lot of the parenting kind of on my own and that sort of stuff, but he was very hands-on and we really enjoyed that time together. And then in August of 2020, as the world was opening up, Darcy had a film that was greenlit to begin prepping and shooting in September. And so it was one of the first films to get this sort of go ahead to start moving forward and show you climate. And so it was definitely a challenge for him. He was the type of producer who was in charge of organizing the whole show. So the whole project manager, dealing with everything from the budget to who's feeding the cast and crew to who's getting who from A to B and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty challenging, which he was kind of okay with because it added a little spice to a job that was getting a little stale for him. But inevitably what happened, somebody got COVID, a bunch of people got COVID, he tested positive. And so we landed in our house in the end of September and everyone was kind of just following the mandate, trying to, just do what we were supposed to do back then. It was all very new. Really. And despite our lack of fear around it, we sort of followed the rules. He was trying to get his show back on the road. So with no symptoms or anything like that, he was quarantining on the top level of our house. And Elkitz and I were on the main floor. So we would have our connections upstairs, downstairs. He was feeling pretty bad because after all of that big break, the kids had just finally got back to school and I finally got back to my business and teaching and doing the things I wanted to be doing. And then the film. So anyways, so he was on hiatus and he was up there and he was trying to figure out how to get the show back on the road, which is like the protocols back then, keeping 200 people on a film set. Oh, sure. 6 feet apart. Do you feed the crowds? How do you transport actors if they're not able to be in the same space? It was really tricky, but he was a stress-free kind of guy. Like he really didn't allow his work to inform mental health at all. At the same time, it was challenging. He was frustrated. And I had been able to sneak out of the house here and there and go for a little run, a little trot around the neighborhood or whatever, get some fresh air. But he hadn't done that for a week. And so one night we were sitting, we were having a beautiful conversation actually about what's what's worth doing? Like, is this worth it? Because he worked for himself. He could step away from any job if he didn't think it was going to work. But he was very loyal to his crew and his like longtime crew of his team. Also, I think like he's just a guy who likes to get a job done, right? That was his nature. And so he was working hard at it. And I just said, like, just really consider whether this is like worth your time and effort. And also, I think you should get out of the house.
Right.
And I said, you don't have to go to a restaurant or go walking around in a shopping mall. Just go get outside, go for a drive, go do something just for a change of scenery to clear your head and have some thoughts about like whether this is worth doing. So it was a really beautiful conversation. Late one night, he on the top stair, me on the bottom stair with our tea.
Oh,
And then he went to bed and I went to bed with the kids and we woke up in the morning and he came downstairs and he said, I think you're right. I guess I'll just go get gas and like put gas in the car and I'll drive to the office, which was abandoned, and make sure everything's
right.
And so he headed out, but he didn't really have a destination that I knew of. Just sort of handed him his to-go coffee in his favorite mug and he went out without a coat, just kind of headed out to nowhere. And that's kind of where he went, the middle of nowhere. But I didn't really realize that. So as the morning progressed, him and I were texting, but we were texting about that beautiful conversation we were having the night before. We were not texting about where he was and what he decided to do. And as the day wore on, he had said, I'll keep in touch and let you know like when I'm coming home. And as a film wife, I'm used to my husband being away for long hours.
Well, sure.
Continued on with my day. I had a women's circle that I was joining online where we were doing some EFT tapping, which is my modality of choice for balancing my nervous system. And the kids were happy and everything was fine. And I did reach out and text him a couple more times and didn't hear back. But again, not unusual because many times as a filmmaker, they're trying to sort of get back in action. And so to be on a phone call for him and have his phone and be unreachable for hours, not common. So there was no part of me throughout the whole day that thought twice about that until 4:00. When all of a sudden I got a feeling in my body.
Really?
It was such a somatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
Intellectually, no problem. Not home at no problem. I knew that something was wrong. And I called his assistant to see when the last time he had seen him was. And he said, no, I haven't talked to him since this morning around 8:30. So before he'd even left the house, she checked in. And he said he didn't actually show up at the production meeting at 11. And I was wondering if he was just a little bit mad or something, like just frustrated and I wasn't sure. And I said, I mean, I don't know how I knew that something was wrong because this is a very stable, capable person.
Right.
I mean, I just can't even tell you. It was some sort of a download.
You just knew.
I did.
You just
felt it in my body. And I did the obvious things, which felt surreal at the time, calling hospitals, calling hotels. A lot of the production team were quarantining in hotels, so I thought he might have gone to one of them.
Sure.
And nobody had heard a thing. And I didn't know where he was. And now he wasn't answering his phone and it was going straight to voicemail. And I just... The terror in my body just like amped up.
Of course.
I knew I had to call the police, so I did. And they said right away, we need to do a missing persons report, which is just the most surreal thing you ever felt in their life. I mean, this was a guy who wanted to be home with his family as much as possible. Anyways, that began. But the problem with that was they can only look in the area that he was last seen. And he was last seen in my house by me. So as it unfolded, it was really a lot like a horror movie. Like crazy rainy night, police knocking on the door at midnight to come and get a photo of him, to procure a photo for the file. I mean, I'll never forget it. And
I'll bet.
Also, he was a person who had never not come home. He never wanted to go out after work with his friends. He spent all day with them at work. He wasn't a person he didn't drink. He didn't do drugs. He didn't have, he wasn't mentally unstable. And I thought, what could be happening right now? And indeed, it was a shock that he never came home through that whole night. And so the next day, the circus began. And with the police involved, I was forced to really explore every possibility,
certainly.
Because they have to ask you all those questions. of who knows, like, is he unstable? Is he holed up somewhere? Does he have a whole other family in, Africa?
Oh, how crushing.
As he fled, right? And you have to really, and while you're in that experience, I had to entertain all of those things because, of course, impossible that he wouldn't even come home one night. So once the impossible has happened, you have to realize that you can't rule anything out.
Right.
But in my heart, I knew that something was wrong.
Sure.
And so, I mean, these were the days when people were like still being sort of shunned for going into each other's homes and things. My sister-in-law came over to Vancouver from Vancouver Island quickly to help with the kids. I wasn't comfortable telling the kids what was happening because I didn't have anything for them that was truthful.
You don't have any answers.
Yeah. So I was basically, and my cousin also abandoned a girls' trip in a nearby city to come as well. And the saving grace in all of this was that my two kids were used to their dad being gone. And we didn't, as a family, if one of us traveled, we didn't do a lot of telephone or like FaceTime or anything. It just wasn't our thing. And so it wasn't unusual for them to just like move through their day with their aunties around.
And how old were your children?
Yes. At the time, my son Miller was 9, almost 10, and my daughter Summer was 5.
Okay.
And so there's me hiding in the closet, answering calls, calls. The film community in Vancouver, because there was no sort of effective search happening yet, the film community in Vancouver came together. A lot of them put their productions on hold, and 2 of his longtime collaborators started a search effort with volunteers.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And they also started a GoFundMe account, which raised about $60,000 in about half a day.
Oh my goodness.
To get down helicopter surveillance.
Sure.
There was a feeling among us who knew Darcy well that he may have headed up the coast where we live. Just about 45 minutes beyond Vancouver is a beautiful forested area called Squam.
Okay.
And beyond that is the very famous ski resort, Whistler Mountain. And then that was his kind of go for a drive with a coffee. And so my brothers and his friends all were kind of like, I bet he went up the Sea to Sky Highway. I bet he's up there somewhere. And we were just going on instinct. I mean, we were desperate. And so they began a bit of search up there, started putting up posters and whatnot. And I basically sat frozen on my couch. You can imagine.
Just waiting for an answer.
Fielding calls, taking all the messages you can imagine what was happening at that time. People from all over came to offer their everything from like mediumship abilities, intuitive, psychic people who help with police investigations. Mm-hmm. And the most important person who came out of the woodwork for me at that time was a beautiful stranger called Sophie, who is an EFT tapping mentor and a very highly intuitive person. And she would call me from Montreal 12, 15 times a day to tap with me over the phone and move this trauma through my nervous system as it was occurring.
Right.
And that was an incredibly grounding, supportive thing because it allowed me to really stay in my body and think and respond as opposed to reacting. And I cannot tell you the gifts that came from being grounded during that obviously my body was in shock and I was in a state of fight flight, but maybe a little less as a result of the tapping support. And so with that, I had this really, really remarkable experience where I was looking around and I didn't have the one thing that I needed. My husband was not where he was supposed to be, but everywhere else I looked around me, I had exactly what I needed. Somehow the right supports coming out of the woodwork. And that continued through the whole experience of what unfolded. But ultimately, on the 9th day of this experience, a mountain biker found his car.
Wow.
There had been torrential rain here. The rains here are ferocious.
Mm-hmm.
There had been torrential rain leading up to this, and that is the nature of the climate. We're in the deep woods, old growth forest here. Okay. A living rainforest, if you will, a lot like the Pacific Northwest, right? In the US. And where he had gone was up towards this town of Squamish, but off a logging road, which sounds really precarious. Like, why would someone do that? Well, I know why he did that. This is his old stomping grounds. He used to be a location scout for car commercials and things that film up there on those big windy roads.
Sure, and they want those really unique shots.
And so he would do a lot of like helicopter surveillance up there, like looking around different areas. And he knew those roads like the back of his hand. So I'd sent him off with no destination and a big fat coffee. And I know his constitution, he would have had to go to the bathroom. Yeah. Now, because he was quote unquote infected, he wouldn't have gone to a coffee shop or used the bathroom. It was against the rule.
Sure.
He would have gone up, put out his car and gone somewhere there. Now, he was not going on a hike. He was wearing, beautiful Italian leather boots with a sole like glass.
Mm-hmm.
No coat. Just a coat in the back of his car, which he did take out and put on because it wasn't there. But what he did was he parked his car, he tossed his mask off, and he went out somewhere there, and he didn't ever come home.
Oh, did they ever find him?
No. So a search began as soon as the car was found. Then they have a starting point, right? So they could periodically work their way out. So the search and rescue got in touch with me right away. As well, all of those volunteers who'd been kind of up in the area joined in with the search as well. Lots of people from my family, people from the community that I didn't even know until I find out all the time people that were up there that I didn't realize were up there. But the forest is dense. And there is a ferocious river that runs through the area. The best swimmer wouldn't survive if they ended up in there for whatever reason. It's wild. It's just wild.
Oh my goodness.
And so that is, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that here he is involved in film, and this sounds like the plot for a movie.
100%. And so the search went on, and long before that, thankfully, the police had deemed him stable. So often the police won't share this news publicly because they feel like if someone's trying to hide or they're a danger to themselves, that they might harm themselves. So right away they could tell from his profile that wasn't the case. And so they did actually share it publicly before that just because we wanted all hands on deck. Now we had the best hands on deck with the search and rescue team, but they can only do so much. And they can only use those resources. They're volunteers actually. And yeah, just during that time, the amount of support and love that was pouring into the world, with every click of a $5 donation to the GoFundMe, I just thought, oh my goodness, what is happening right now? The world had been so divided and living in such fear. And then I just felt this onslaught of love and support through this whole time. And I thought, man, this is one of the best projects you've ever orchestrated.
Right.
Wow. There was this, I can't even explain it. Just that somatic feeling of knowing something was wrong. I also had a feeling that experience was somehow meant for us. And I can honestly say that I knew it that early.
Was it a feeling, a sense that this was the beginning of healing for you and your children? This outpouring of love and support?
I don't think I was even at the acceptance that he was gone at that point.
Okay. All right.
Because I wasn't super, well, that's not actually true. And if you read my book, which I'll tell you about later, I did on the third morning of his absence sit in meditation, and I was a sloppy meditator at best. I was a person who believed in something bigger than me, but I didn't understand my deep ability to channel and all of our ability to channel energy. And as I sat on the third morning of his disappearance, I was trying to get grounded before the onslaught of the day. And I sat in meditation and I wanted to know so badly where he was. And a vision happened for me.
Wow.
And I saw him in a forest. At this point, of course, we didn't know where he was.
Sure.
I saw him in a forest, and it's a close-up shot of him walking in the woods, and he's walking towards a tree. And as soon as he gets to the tree trunk, he drops right out of the frame. And what's interesting about that vision is it's obviously the least desirable picture I ever wanted to have in my head and my heart.
Of course.
And also, I felt peaceful.
Mm.
And I felt like I had an understanding of the truth, and the truth always feels good.
Right. It's a sense of closure.
It is. And it can bring us closer to an acceptance, right? So then all of this unfolded. I did come to a place of acceptance after really talking with my cousin who was a first responder who was there, talking about probability of Darcy being alive at this point. So now the search got called off after about 15 days of him being gone. So that was the time where I had to come to acceptance and share it with my kids.
Wow.
And it's been a journey since then.
And how did you explain it to your kids?
It was really powerful. Like I mentioned, I was looking around me as I was going through all of these experiences, and I felt like I had everything I needed just perfectly, the right people in the right place at the right time. Lucky for me, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate. He is one of the leading trauma psychologists in the world. If now that I said his name, Gabor Mate, you will see his name everywhere. He's probably, thanks, and he had made a documentary film with my brother several years earlier. And so I literally had him giving me guidance.
Wow.
As to how to minimize the trauma when I deliver the message to my children. One of the things he said to me was not to lie to them,
Right.
And
Right.
that felt very true to me.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came down to it, I had to just basically tell them that, we were guessing that he had gone for a bit of a walk, and that in the woods, there must have been some kind of an accident. All we could do and guess, and that there had been a hefty search, and that they hadn't found any evidence of him. And we had to accept that the probability of him being alive was not good. And what I told them, and I remember saying this out loud, and I feel emotional saying it now because it felt so true. I said to them, you guys, your dad never, ever thought that something like this would happen, but commit to me in case it did. And sorry, I haven't said those.
That's okay. I'm stunned myself.
Yeah.
You take a minute.
I really meant it.
Yeah.
I really knew, like I said, I had felt like this had happened for me for some sort of reason. And I knew that I was going to rise to the occasion, and that I was capable of it. I understood my capability innately. I don't know how. Because, of course, all of the stories are going through your head. You're projecting to the future.
Well, of course.
So, wow. Yeah. So that's how I told them. And, with deep sadness and great confidence that we were going to move forward. And over time, I just think that they believed me. And they started to realize that this was something that obviously was out of their control. But we three all started to learn about acceptance and grief and
right. And you became their constant. Yeah. And they became yours, actually.
Yeah.
As well. Tara, we've had many, many, many stories on this podcast. We've got over 200 episodes. There has never been as compelling a story as what you have just shared with us. So first of all, I want to thank you for being brave enough to share it, because a story like that isn't easy and just leaves so many unanswered questions. Mm. And as someone who interviews people routinely, it makes me feel very guarded about asking a question. But one of the questions on my mind is, have you ever entertained, or do you ever entertain the thought that at one point there may be a discovery, or he may be found somewhere, even living somewhere?
One of the gifts in the experience, like I said, is that when you are learning that the impossible is literally happening. This person who's so devoted to his loved his life, loved his wife, right? Like, never wanted to be away from us. When the possible happened, I also had to recognize that impossibly wonderful things can happen in the workplace. Had I entertained every possibility? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I still occasionally, it's over 4 years now. And I occasionally, I had someone reach out to me the other day, an intuitive who's connected to me through a different friend in a different part of the country, reach out, and she does sort of psychic investigations with police. And she had kind of she doesn't know me, but she had kind of a download about it where she's like, I think he's like a John Doe in another country, which could absolutely happen. If he ended up in that river that day, he would have ended up into the Howe Sound, which feeds into the Pacific Ocean, and he could be in Washington State in a heartbeat. So I understand your hesitancy to ask the question, but yeah, I do. Do I fell on it? No. Do I
No.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. I clearly you have somehow in some way acquired or established within yourself a very sound foundation in your belief and primarily your acceptance of something that is beyond your control.
Indeed.
And I really don't know many people that could, first of all, accomplish that, let alone accomplish it with the grace that I see in you and sense in you.
Thank you.
And I applaud you for that. It's especially difficult to do all that for yourself, but then to do it so that you present to your children that you are giving your children a sense and a gift, actually, of learning themselves to acquire that strength within themselves, the learning of acceptance.
Thank you for noticing.
And it's awesome. It's amazing. I have never seen it. Never. You see those things on TV. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I don't. And here I am, face to virtual face, albeit with someone who has accomplished this. So, Tara, I am in awe of you at this moment. I really am.
Yeah.
So I don't have really a lot more questions, except please tell us about your book, because I obviously want to know more, and I'm sure our listeners do too. So tell us about your book.
Well, thank you for all of your kind words. My kids really are a driving force. I really wanted to mentor them in a way that would allow them to use this experience to be set up for success in their lives. Because what I learned quickly was that uncertainty is the only certain. And,
exactly,
and so for us to sort of practice acceptance so that we can move forward was really important for me. And I had a lot of great spiritual teachers help me with that. And I had the benefit of not having to dive right into a job when Darcy died. Rather, I was able to dive into stewarding my kids through grief and also really developing my own spiritual awareness, which was obviously what was meant to happen. So I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you recognizing all of those things. When he first died, it was probably, he died in late September. And then in around December, I remember recognizing when I'd be out for a run or out for a walk, pondering things in my life, I was thinking about loss. And I couldn't find a book to read that was helpful for me.
Right.
There was a narrative.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. And there was a narrative in all of the books that were recommended to me, which sort of sounded to me at the time like, oh, this is going to be forever. Oh, anything that happens now is a consolation prize. Oh, this is the end of the world. You're never going to get over it. You'll never be able to really fully move forward. And because I hadn't at that time had a lot of experience of grief, certainly not with shock and tragedy involved.
Right.
I thought, okay, I can see that grief is going to be with me forever. And I started to recognize that that was a direct reflection of the big love that we had for Darcy, that our grief mirrored the love. Okay. I also wasn't willing to spend my life suffering.
Right.
I was young. My kids were young. This is not a consolation prize. And so I started to steer away from grief books. I started to read about people who were doing creative things despite adversity. And that was more inspiring to me. It felt more true to my nature. And I've always been a lover of writing and sharing. And so I thought, gosh, everywhere I turn, I'm seeing these people experiencing loss and nobody knows what to say to me because obviously my story is quite sensational and horrific.
And different. It's so unique.
But over here, I had a friend who was going to war with breast cancer. And over here, I had a friend whose marriage was falling apart. And I was seeing common threads in all of this. And then the whole world had just experienced this thing here. One day, one thing was one way. And the next day, it was just.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's all loss is.
Sure it is.
Well, been through that. So somehow we shouldn't be separated and afraid to talk to each other. We can connect through the universal experience of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us have a different story.
Sure.
People were like, oh, it's just so different for you because you don't have closure. But my friend didn't know why cancer chose her body.
Right.
My other friend didn't know where her marriage went off the rails.
Yes.
And all of this came together and I started to have stories coming to me in my head. And I decided to start writing a blog and publishing real time our experience as best as I could with candid, raw pain and humor and all sorts of things. And I felt that I started to get feedback right away from people that it was helpful for them or they liked quirky style of writing because I kind of write like I talk. And so all of this over time, I also wanted to document the story from a memoir type perspective for my kids so they understand.
Absolutely.
And so that I can remember down the line just how powerful and transformative the experience was. And I thought I was going to maybe have two books, like one of the body of work of the blog posts and one of the memoir, but actually they came together beautifully into one book. And so it's called, your listeners can't see this, but I'm going to show it to you.
They can't see it, but
Called Snapshots of My Broken Heart.
Snapshots of My Broken Heart.
How we find peace and connection when we choose to view loss through the lens of love.
Right.
And so I really went to town trying to mine the gifts of the experience and share those and remind people that we're in this life together where everything is uncertain. And in the face of adversity, we always have a choice between fear and love.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, you expressed something that I want to call attention to when you were talking about closure. You were talking about comments that you received from people you knew who said, well, you don't have any closure. However, you found closure. And I think that's an important perspective because so often we merely will sit in our desolation and we'll just wait for that closure to smack us in the face. We really shouldn't. We should try to find the closure ourselves. I had a similar experience with that with my husband, and he had been ill for 8 months. We knew that the end was going to come for him. We just didn't know when. And I mean, there was the finality of his death. I was with him as he took his last breath, and I moved on after that. And at some point, somebody made a comment to me about, well, I can't remember how they said it. You got closure because you were there with Tom when he took his last breath. And I said, but that wasn't closure for me. That wasn't closure for me. That wasn't the end. That didn't sum it all up in a neat little package. The closure came a little bit later when I accepted the fact that now he was gone and it was up to me to take care of the rest of my life in whatever form that was going to take. I had a new mission, a new challenge, if you will, from the universe, the gods, God, whatever you believe in, whatever your belief system is. It was up to me. That was when I moved from closure. That was my closure. The realization that it was now up to me and only me because I was no longer part of that couple.
And yes. And a lot of what you're saying really rings true with, my ideas around choice and choosing fear over love or waiting for closure. I did write a blog post early on where it's called The Hostage, where I was speaking about how I was sitting on that couch frozen in fight flight. And I realized at one point, as the search and rescue mission was happening, that there was a chance that there was never going to be anything found. So was I going to sit hostage? Or was I going to accept and move forward? So I gave myself the closure there. Exactly. And you were ready. Always said that the closure and the acceptance go hand in hand. And I had a wonderful teacher who is also very intuitive and a conscious channel sit with me early on, and she didn't know my story. And when I told it to her briefly, she gave me this message. She said, it's your path now to understand that closure doesn't come from a place outside you. It comes from a place inside you. And you may not get the 3-dimensional closure that most people look for, but you know what you get? An extraordinary life.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to find that in yourself. And imagine being able to do that in this lifetime, to be able to find peace under the circumstances without needing anything else to fall in place outside of you. And I think we all get our time where we find a level of acceptance, which equals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I just think that's an interesting perspective. So thanks for bringing that up. Well, sadly, our time is just flying by. So we need to wrap things up. You've told us about your book. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you and just, speak directly to our listeners. Again, make sure you mention the name of your book again, where they can get a copy of it, and anything else you'd like our listeners to know. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my book, to begin with, is called Snapshots of My Broken Heart. How We Find Peace and Connection When We Choose to View Loss Through the Lens of Love by Tara Wilde. You can find that in any of the Amazon market and order it directly from there. I do hope that it lands in the hands of anybody that it might be helpful for. I guarantee that the darkness of the story is lit up by the powerful experience that my kids and I have had and the amazing lessons we've talked about here today that have really enhanced our life and allowed us to really embrace where we are, as opposed to feeling like life is, happening to us. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a beautiful community of souls there where we talk about loss of all kinds. So divorce, diagnosis, death, dissonance. We recognize our connection in the experience of loss. And that group is called the Luminous Heart Healing Collective on Facebook.
Okay.
And then I have a fun little Instagram handle, which is also called the Luminous Heart Healing. And I do it's a bit personal and a bit about grief and loss. But on Facebook is where you can really find me. And then I'm always creating courses and things like that I offer through there. So if you're interested in connecting with me, I often do small container courses where we start to really practice like how we can choose the lens of love in the face of adversity. So as we move through our lives and things go sideways, not just death, but like just life coming at you, how do we choose the lens of love? What tools I've used and all that sort of stuff. And I advocate on there for all sorts of amazing healing modalities. So really the best place to connect is the Luminous Heart Healing Collective on Facebook.
Okay. That's super. So you will soon find me a new member of your group on Facebook.
Yay.
Because I will be headed there shortly. It's a compelling story, and it kind of leaves you speechless, leaves you without words, to say the least.
Fair.
So to our listeners, I want to say a few things. First of all, I don't know if any of you have shared a similar experience where your loss was such that you don't have all the answers, that maybe some conclusions were never reached, that in some ways you still there's that little gray area of limbo, perhaps, where at some point you would like to have some certainty. If you have, I just can't imagine. I just can't imagine. And y'all know me. I usually don't hesitate with words, but I seem to have not finding exactly the right words I want at the moment. So keeping that in mind, I will say to Tara that with your Facebook group, it's likely I will be asking you for a second guest episode to talk about loss in general as it pertains to grief. We've touched on that topic a couple of times, but I think it's one that always bears repeating, because I have made a comment that I don't think there's a person in the world at this point that is untouched by grief completely because of the pandemic, if nothing else, that there was just so much loss in there. And even our younger children today, I'm sure they don't know that they grieve, but they lost so much social structure with the changes from the pandemic, and some changes that still continue to this day. Different ways of doing things. So that definitely to me sounds like a reason for Tara to come back.
I love it.
So thank you. So to our listeners, please take care of yourselves. It is so very important. And again, it is now 2025, a new year. Set some new goals. And I did not say resolution. I said goals. Set some goals for yourself. Set some achievable ones, because we all need wins in our lives. Don't set a goal so lofty that you may never achieve it. Set one you can reach, even if it's just tomorrow I'm going to get up, take a shower, change my clothes, and make myself breakfast, because maybe you haven't eaten in a few days because you're suffering. So take care of yourselves, everyone. Happy New Year, and come back again next week as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.